In this video, we'll go over 10 talents from Vanilla WoW that are a little weird, in the way that they're either really bad, out of place, or just did a unique thing. But mostly, a lot of these are just going to be kind of bad. And starting off, we'll go with one of those out of place talents. So number 10 will be Weapon Balance. Now, I'm going to read you what this talent does, and I want you to guess which class and spec it belongs to. Increases the damage you deal with melee weapons by 2%, up to a maximum of 10% with 5 talent points. Now, would you think this was a talent for a weapon-based class, like a warrior, rogue, or paladin? Well, you'd be wrong, because this was a deep talent in the Balanced Druid tree. Weapon Balance was a 20-point talent for Balanced Druids, a spec that today could be more accurately described as a pure caster class. In Vanilla WoW, or in the early days of Vanilla WoW anyway, Balanced Druids didn't really have a niche yet, and their talents generally increased the damage or interacted with their spell casting, with the final talent in the tree being Hurricane, a spell casting AoE. And then randomly there was Weapon Balance, which increased the damage they did with their melee weapons, despite the fact that they had no melee attacks with weapons, nor any other talents in the balance tree that indicated they wanted to use melee weapons. Now, druids did have melee abilities while in cat or bear form, and this talent did not affect those. Eventually though, in a later patch, weapon balance was removed from druids, and they kind of redid the talent tree a little bit to be more spellcasting focused, and even gave them Moonkin form as their final talent. And at number 9, we have Curse of Exhaustion. Curse of Exhaustion in its first form was kind of a unique slow. Curse of Exhaustion was a 20-point talent in the Affliction tree, and it gave the Warlock a curse with the effect of reduce the target speed to 90% of their normal run speed for 12 seconds. Now, what's interesting about this is that it doesn't just say lower your target speed by 10%. It says reduce their speed to 90% of normal. And this little distinction actually makes it so it's a little bit more useful than the standard slow. Now, there was also another talent right next to this one, which would increase the slow to 30%, which most people took with this talent, so I'm just going to refer to it as a 30% slow for the rest of this part. Anyways, with its unique wording, if you applied Curse of Exhaustion to a player on a mount, for example, it would first reduce the running speed to the standard 100%, so completely ignoring the mount movement speed increase, and then it would apply the 30% slow, whereas other movement speed decreases would just slow on top of the mounted speed, and not slow for as much as Curse of Exhaustion. Or if used on any other run speed increase, like a sprint, for example, it would lower their run speed to 100%, and then lower that by another 30%. It would just normalize the run speed, and then slow them, which made it a pretty decent slow. And then in a later patch in Vanilla, Blizzard removed this distinction and just turned Curse of Exhaustion into a normal slow, with its new effect being reduces the target movement speed by 30% for 12 seconds. So the reason this one even makes this list wasn't because it was bad, but because its effect was unique. And at number 8, we have Throwing Weapon Specialization. This was a 25-point combat rogue talent with 2 ranks that would increase the range of your thrown weapons by 6 yards. Now, here's the thing about thrown weapons in Vanilla WoW. They sucked. Thrown weapons did terrible damage, required you to aim the weapon, or I guess had a casting time, and had a cooldown. You could only use a throwing weapon once, or maybe twice, if you had a fast one and did a little bit of kiting, but it was so inefficient to use throwing weapons that they were really only ever used to just pull a mob. And that's about it. You did not need to throw extra ones, nor did you need to waste talent points deep in the combat tree to get an extra 6 yards on it. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this talent was useless, but not only that, it was a top talent, being only second to the final talent in the combat tree, Adrenaline Rush. That's why in patch 1.12, Throwing Weapon Specialization was removed from the combat tree, and instead it was replaced with Weapon Expertise, which was much better, as it gave the rogue 6 extra expertise in swords, fists, and dagger weapons. Number 7, Two-Handed Axes and Maces. This was a 10-point enhancement shaman talent that allowed the shaman to use two-handed axes and maces. Pretty simple effect. Enhanced shamans also had a 20-point talent called parry, which allowed them to parry attacks. Here's the thing about these two talents. All other classes that can parry or use two-handed weapons get those abilities as baseline abilities, not something you have to talent into. And after Vanilla WoW, no classes had to use talent points to be able to use two-handed weapons or parry. But during Vanilla WoW, Enhanced Shamans had this unique distinction of needing to waste their talent points to get baseline stuff. But what made two-handed axes and maces kind of annoying, for lack of a better word, was the fact that if you swapped your talents and lost this talent point, you lost all of your skills in those weapons. So if you took this talent again later on, you'd have to skill up your two-handed axes and mace skill from 0. Vanilla WoW did not have dual talent specialization. That was not added until Wrath of the Lich King, so every time an Enhanced Shaman had to swap specs, they would have to spend a couple hours skilling up their skills in these two weapons, something no other class needed to do, because they were given their abilities to use weapons as baseline abilities, not talents. Number 6, the LIGHTWELL. LIGHTWELL is infamous for being one of the worst and poorly designed abilities in WoW's history, despite the fact that it seems like a pretty useful ability at first glance. LIGHTWELL was a last point talent in the Holy Tree for priests, and had the effect of creates a holy light well near the priest, and party and raid members can click on the light well to restore health over 10 seconds. Being attacked cancels this effect. At first glance, seems pretty useful. The priest will place down a light well, and party members can click on it to heal themselves. But here's the thing. For the longest time, taking damage would cancel the heal you got from the light well. I think this was in place so that a healer couldn't just drop a light well next to a tank, and they could just keep clicking on it to heal themselves while tanking. But this also made it kind of awkward to use for other people, as in a raid fight, you'd constantly be taking damage, which could easily cancel this effect. And there's also the thing that players have to click on it themselves if they want to get a heal. And it was easy for players to accidentally click it multiple times and use up too many of the charges at once. And there's also the thing that no one ever wanted to click on the light well. In fact, it was kind of infamous for this, and probably this reason alone. Blizzard even put it on some of their loading screen tips for people to just click on the light well. Blizzard tried so hard to get people to click on the light well that they eventually gave up and converted it into something that would spit out heals to people, before finally removing the ability with Legion. And at number 5, we've got Lacerate, the last talent in the Survival Hunter tree. Lacerate is a pretty standard dot. It was a melee range bleed that did about 100 damage over 21 seconds, and did not scale. Serpent Sting at rank 4, which hunters obtained at level 40, did 140 damage over 15 seconds, which is just a straight up better dot. And Serpent Sting is baseline, and a ranged ability. The max rank of Serpent Sting obviously did much more damage. Lacerate was just really bad for some reason. But also in the survival tree, there was an ability called Melee Specialization, which increased the damage a hunter did with melee weapons by 5%, and was at the 25-point talent mark, the second to last row before Lacerate in the survival tree. Hunters in Vanilla WoW had terrible melee damage, but Blizzard had a couple of abilities in the survival tree sorted towards melee. In patch 1.7, Lacerate was removed from the survival tree and replaced with Wyvern String. And then after that, they didn't completely remove melee talents from the survival tree until Mists of Pandaria. Number 4, Blood Craze. Blood Craze is a 10-point Fury Warrior talent with the effect of regenerate 3% of your total health over 6 seconds after being the victim of a critical strike. Now at first glance, this may seem like a pretty niche heal, until you remember a few things about combat in Vanilla WoW. For one, its heal is really low, 3% of your total health over 6 seconds, as if getting 3% of your health instantly would be too much or something. But putting it as a 6-second hot, well, it's kind of like a worse version of Brush It Off. Brush It Off is the new Colteran human racial, which heals you for 2% of the damage you take over 4 seconds. Except Brush It Off works on any ability, and not just crits. Which brings me to another part of this ability. It only activates if you're subject to a critical strike. One of the tank's jobs is getting enough defense rating so that they won't be crit by bosses, who have an inherent 6% chance to crit. So Blood Craze isn't a tanking talent. Fury Warriors and raids should not be getting hit by anything. So it's not a PvE raid or dungeon talent. Out in the open world though, spells can't crit you, but physical, ranged, and melee attacks can. And if they do so much damage that this tiny little heal isn't going to help very much, especially having to spend 3 points into it. But what's funny about this talent is that this is the buffed version of Blood Craze. The original version of Blood Craze had this effect. Allows 15% of your health regeneration to work during combat for 20 seconds after being the victim of a critical strike. And health regeneration as a stat in vanilla WoW is just referring to your out of combat health regeneration. You know, the thing that recovered incredibly slowly in vanilla WoW? Health regeneration was so bad that the troll racial regeneration, which allowed 10% of your health regeneration to continue during combat at all times, was considered one of the worst racials in the game. And the original talent allowed you to sometimes have a slightly better version than the troll racial, only after being hit by a crit, of course. That is to say, Blood Craze was a very interesting talent, and for some reason was very rarely picked, despite warriors having almost no self-healing in vanilla. Number 3, Divine Strength. Let's play another little guessing game. I'm going to read off what this talent does, and then I want you to guess which paladin tree it's a deep talent in. Divine Strength increases your strength by 10% at 5 ranks. If you guessed it was a 25-point holy talent, and in the second to last row, you'd be correct. But did you also know holy paladins didn't do melee damage? Or they weren't supposed to anyway, in raids or PvP where it mattered. This is just another one of those interesting talents that would actually be really good for a lot of classes, but for some reason is given to a spec that doesn't need it, and that's why it was later removed from the holy tree. I should also mention that the last talent at the time was Holy Shock, which is a spell holy paladins have today, except in its first version, it only did damage at a 20-yard range and a 30-second cooldown. Holy Shock was supposed to be the paladin version of the Shaman Shocks, except all 3 of the Shaman Shocks were really good, and had 6-second cooldowns. And for some reason they gave paladins 1 shock with a much longer cooldown at 30 seconds, but with the same short 20-yard range, and not at all good. Later on in vanilla though, they did finally give it the option to heal instead of doing damage, which was the hallmark of the Holy Shock ability, where you could choose to do either or, but it still wasn't good. Blizzard had a really hard time getting paladins to use Holy Shock, basically until they added Holy Power to the game in Cataclysm. Number 2, Primal Instincts. This was the final talent in the Feral Druid tree, which had the effect of lowering the mana cost of your shapeshifting by 25%. Now, shapeshifting was very mana intensive, and Blizzard did intend for druids to be able to change forms regularly during combat. But shapeshifting was too mana expensive, and a 25% reduction was not enough to encourage shapeshifting combat. And in fact, a 25% mana reduction to shapeshifting was a terrible final talent, and that's why they removed it and replaced it with something better. And then moved this talent to the balance tree in the second row of talents and renamed it to Natural Shapeshifter, which at 3 ranks reduced the mana cost of shapeshifting by 30%, and at an easy point to get in the talent tree, with only requiring 3 ranks, wasn't half bad here. And that's the thing, this version of it was just straight up better than Primal Instincts, and even then, it's a pretty meh talent. Which should go to show how terrible Primal Instincts was. It was a worse version of Natural Shapeshifter, and one of the final talents the Feral Druid could take, a role usually taken up by one of their best abilities or talents. And finally, number 1, Master Conjurer. This was a 15-point demonology talent that, at max rank, reduced the mana cost and casting time of your stone creations by 40%. Here's the thing about Warlock stones. They could only create 4 of them. 2 of them were basically useless, and the 2 useful ones, the Health Stone and Soul Stone, were never casted in combat. All 4 of them were things you casted outside of combat as kind of a preparation spell. So their cast times and mana costs didn't matter, which in lies this talent's uselessness. At least Primal Instincts was somewhat useful, as shapeshifting was very mana expensive, and something you might have to do in combat sometimes. Although rarely did you have to cast any of your stone abilities in combat. In a later patch of Vanilla WoW, Blizzard just straight up removed this talent, as no one really took it and it was kind of useless. And I think that's why I put it at number 1. Out of all the talents, this one is arguably the least useful one, which is saying something considering a lot of the talents I covered in this video. Alright, and that's the end of the video. Do you know of any other weird or useless talents that existed in WoW's lifetime that should have made this video? Or have any ideas for videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.